For this section, we're going to have two separate videos on World War One. The first video, I think it's really important that even though we're looking at this from an American perspective, to really understand the causes of World War One and to sort of digest and break down why the war itself is going to take place. The second video is going to look more at the American home front and how the home front is going to be mobilized in the event of World War One, and at least with the U.S. entry into the war a little bit later. So, if we think about the coming of the war, I think there are four really important main causes we can look at. So, I have an acronym set up here so you can think MAIN if that's helpful. But with this, if we think about these main causes of World War One, the first one that we're really going to look into is going to be militarism. Now, with militarism, this is something that had impacted many different parts of the world over the course of the late 18 and early 1900. So we talked a little bit about imperialism a few weeks ago and how the United States becomes involved in places like Cuba, the Philippines, and very specifically with things like the Spanish-American War. However, the rest of the world also very much involved with imperialism, which is going to actually be our third section right here. So we'll come back to that in just a second. But with this, empires have to be defended. And in order to defend these empires, we can see European nations steadily increase their military spending over the course of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. They are going to be creating new types of guns, they're going to be creating new types of ships, and a lot of this is going to be very, very prevalent in places like Germany. So by 1890, the strongest nation military in Europe is going to be that of Germany's. And a lot of it, again, goes back to defending those territories and their imperial assets that they have in places like Africa and Asia. We can also see that France, Italy, Japan, and the United States will create large navies. And for places like England, they also are going to continue to maintain a lot of their military asset. So when it comes to militarism and why it really matters, we can of course think about the fact that World War One is going to take a lot of these new innovations, these new guns, new weapons, new technologies, and will use those weapons in other parts of the world on a larger scale. So instead of just protecting their empire, they are now going to be protecting their home front, as well as having more aggressive campaigns against other nations. The next thing that I have up here is going to be with the A's for alliances, and that's going to bring in the alliance system. With the alliance system, by 1907, there are going to be two major defense alliances in Europe. And what we mean when we say defense alliances is that with these alliances, if one of these nations is to be attacked or to be sort of brought into a war, their allies are going to support them and will also become part of whatever type of conflict that is. So the first one we have up here, the Triple Entente, later known as the Allies, will consist of France, Britain, and Russia. And the Triple Alliance, later referred to as the Central Powers, will consist of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. So with that, I have a picture up here to sort of show you what it looks like. And on this map, we can see these allied powers here, and we can see the central powers working through here. Now, one thing that I want to sort of point out as far as this war is that for a place like Austria-Hungary or Germany, they are going to be surrounded by people who were from the other side. And I think that's really important to keep in mind, because for the Germans, it might be important for them to have these various alliances, because they know that if a war is to break out, they are going to have to fight not only to this side with France, but also to this side with Russia. So I think, again, that's really important to point out. And again, if you take a second to sort of break this down, we can see the emergence of World War One even before it actually takes place. Now, as far as imperialism, again, many Europeans are going to be part of imperialism. They want to create these colonies and these empires so that they can obtain more raw materials. These raw materials are important not only for building new types of structures within their nations, but for the Industrial Revolution. They're important for fueling transportation innovations. For example, we can see that one of the biggest innovations of this sort of late 1800s, early 1900s will be the use of cars. And of course, with cars, you have to have wheels, and those wheels are going to be made from rubber, and that rubber is going to come from Africa, very specifically from the Congo region. So, with that, again, you have to have these raw materials, and each one of these European nations wants to be part of that. They want to have some of those raw materials. It also is going to give them a market to send their manufactured goods. Probably the best example of this comes with India. So for India, they had a thriving textile industry. It was the best in the world. People traveled far and wide to obtain textiles from India. However, as the British eventually take hold of India and it becomes part of their empire, what happens is that they are going to flood the Indian markets with very, very cheaply manufactured British textiles, which in turn will help to destroy a lot of the Indian textile markets for many, many years. I have a map up here, and it's going to restart in just a second, and it will show you a little bit more about European imperialism. So I think that as you could see sort of from the graphic, and here's a still shot of what it looks like in 1914, places like England do have a very, very large influence. They have a very large scope. We can also, of course, look to other parts of the world. So you can see that France is going to have a relatively large empire. If we look at Germany, they have several colonies over here in Africa. For the United States, they also will have several colonies as well. Now, what this means as far as World War I is that for places like Germany, as they start to industrialize even more, they're creating larger militaries, they're using this new technology, they're going to start competing with other nations in order to create more colonies. So, for example, Germany wants to have more African colonies. They want to expand their presence there. And this is going to make them far more competitive. The other sort of factor here, if we think about these main causes of World War I, is going to be nationalism. So with nationalism, it is going to create a lot of rivalries. And when we talk about nationalism, we're not just talking about a group of people who are part of a nation. We're talking about an extreme pride in that nation. On the eve of World War I, people who live in Germany believe that the Germans are the best. They have the best way of life. They are the ones who are supposed to go forward and spread their ideas and their technology. Same for the British, for the French, for the Spanish even. These places that are neutral, they still are starting to create this sort of nationalistic sense of identity where they want to have their nation portrayed as being the best that it possibly can be. This is also going to be very important when it comes to World War I, because many people are willing to die for their nation. They are willing to accept any wrong faults of their nation as potentially not being flaws. Now, of course, these main causes are really important, and we can argue that they are probably the most important in this lead up to World War I. They are what lead to events like the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in June of 1914. It is also because of these main causes that once the Archduke is assassinated, you can see this sort of tailspin into World War I, where various groups are going to come together to fight because of that alliance system. And again, they have the new technology, they have this national pride, and it's going to definitely escalate how fast and how far World War I will spread. What I'm going to play now is a video that is going to help lay out a little bit of this sort of day by day of how the war is going to start and how it begins. So again, I'm going to go back just a little bit so that we can really sort of look at this. So we're looking here at July 28th, 1914, and just watch how fast it goes. So by the time you get to August 6th, you can see the Central Powers and who's involved in the war. And then over here, you can see the Allied Powers and who is involved in the war. And again, it's almost impossible to show how fast this starts because this alliance system makes it happen so quickly. But that's all for this video. I'm just going to sort of leave you again with this picture here to see the Central Powers, the Allied Powers, and how these different sort of main causes really help lead to World War I, and to sort of leave you with that understanding that it's not always simple in history to say it was the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand which led to World War I. In fact, we can see that this sort of lead up and this build up is something that took decades to create. It's something that took a very long time, and it's something that didn't play out overnight until you had that spark. And I think, again, it's important not just for understanding World War One, but most major wars and how they happen, to understand that it doesn't just happen in sort of this tiny little vacuum, and instead it's a much wider, a much larger phenomenon that's taking place.